Hey everyone, welcome back to the TILTEDU channel. In the previous videos, we covered the basics of modeling, the Blender interface, and how you can install Blender onto your PCs. Now we are moving on with the topic of texturing and UV unwrapping. So without further ado, let's get started. So in the last video, this is where we left off. We created our treasure chest model. We modeled the first half or the bottom part, then the top part. Now in today's video, before we get into the UV unwrapping and the texturing part, we need to make some correction to the model. Make sure our model is fit for texturing as well as UV editing, delete unnecessary faces and all those things before we get started with the UV editing. So let's get into that. Now let's isolate our model so that we can see it clearly. Now to isolate your model or to view it as a separate component, you can press the slash button on your numpad like this, and it will isolate your model so that you can better see how it looks. It's easier to navigate around the model as well. So if you look under the model, you can see there are a few unnecessary faces that we don't actually need because we won't be seeing this side of the model. Let's select those faces and delete them. So if you remember in the previous tutorial, I explained how we can select a whole area by selecting the first edge you want to select and the last one while holding Alt to select the whole thing. And if you want to deselect a few of those, you can just, while pressing Shift, you can just select them once again to deselect them. And instead of deleting the vertices, what you can do is select, I'll just give the vertex option. So as you can see, we've deleted that face since we don't need it. Now we can also fill up these holes by selecting the connecting 4 vertices and pressing F on your keyboard to fill up that hole. So just like that, we can do this part as well. F on your keyboard. And since we are using the mirror modifier, everything will be mirrored to the other side. And you can see there are a few unnecessary vertices over here, which we can also delete. It is really hard for me to navigate into these tight spaces with my mouse. So what I can do is press the full stop button on my keyboard to get closer to a specific vertices or an edge. And you can see there is a vertex that is not connected. I'm going to delete that as well. And now we have a problem over here where the vertices are not connected, but they are close to each other. Now in situations like this, what you can do is select both of these vertices and press M on your keyboard to merge them. You can use merge at center. So it will basically combine these two vertices at the center point by averaging the distance in between them. Or there are other options as well. I'm just going to press merge at center. And I'm going to do that for this one as well, so that it looks okay. And I'm going to close off this hole as well. You can see there are no more vertices to fill up this hole. What I can do is just select this vertex individually and press E on my keyboard and select the X axis and extrude it a bit out. Now what I can do is just select all 4 of these vertices and press F to fill it up. Now you can see there's a little bit of space in the middle. To avoid that, what you can do is turn on clipping on your mirror modifier by clicking this button. Now if I go in, I can just merge it easily and you can see it is merged automatically. So you don't have to manually do it every time. Okay, so our model is coming together. Go back into the main view with the reference image. You can actually see there is a little bit of edge on the side as well that we forgot to add. So let's make sure we add that as well. The problem while adding that is when you extrude something that is already being extruded like this edge right here, it's going to cause some shading issues. Delete these extrusions and I'm going to do it once again. If you see the model from the side, you can see it is actually kind of curved, but in the reference image, it is kind of flat. So I'm going to replicate that. Now to do that, what I can do is just select these vertices and just making sure everything is selected. Since not everything is not selected, I'm just going to turn on X-ray view and make sure every vertex is selected. And I'm going to press S on my keyboard and select the Z axis, and I'm going to hit 0 on my numpad. That will basically level out the scaling of these vertices to make them straight. I'm going to do that for the bottom vertices as well. Select S on your keyboard to scale, select the axis and press 0, and I'm going to bring it in as well so that it looks even. Now what you can do is go back into isolation by pressing the slash button, and we can start by filling So we've gotten the edge corrected. Now it looks more like our reference image. Now let's make some corrections for the bottom part as well. So what I've noticed is that it is not as tapered as what we've made it up to be. So let's make sure it is more straight. So we'll basically repeat what we did to the top portion of the chest by selecting these words. It will merge automatically so that it looks like there is space inside the chest to add all your assets. Okay, so we have set up the outer and the inner part of the chest. Now let's just figure out this lock part. Now the lock, with the UV editing, or you can just do it afterwards as well. It's up to your preference. There is no issue in that. So for this example, I'm just going to keep it on. I'm not going to apply my modifiers. So what is the difference between adding a modifier and applying a modifier? Once you apply the modifier, the mesh is finalized. You can see if I just delete the mesh, you can see there is no other side because it is not really created until you apply the mesh. I'm just going to do that part. So I'm just going to switch over into the UV editing menu that is on the top corner. And you can see I've already loaded up a texture. I'll show you how you can load up that texture. And before we start UV editing, let's make sure we add our textures. So let's switch over into the shading workspace and zoom out. So I'm just gonna scale it so that we can see it properly. There are two ways of shading or adding color or detail to your objects. One is a shader based component, or the other is an image texture based component. Since we are making a game that is going to be made inside a game engine usually support only shaders that are created inside the game engine and not or something that is created inside of Blender. So what we do is create image texture based materials so that it is supported inside of Unity. Now before we start anything, we need to add a material to this object so that we can input our texture data. What we can do is select the object and press new to create a material, and you can just rename it. Okay, so we have created a basic material. Now, before we get into the textures, good add-on you can enable inside of Blender is known as the Node Wrangler add-on. It will help you speed up your workflow when it comes to texturing. Now, to activate any add-ons that are built into Blender, you can just go into Edit, Preference, and go into the add-on section. So make sure you activate this add-on before we get to the texturing part, because I'm going to use this add-on. Well, I'm going to select this shader right here. I'm going to press Ctrl-Shift-T to open up the menu where I can find my textures. So these are the textures that I've downloaded online. What I'm going to do is press A on my keyboard to select the whole thing and select the principal texture set. So what that will do is basically map all these textures automatically. So if we don't add the Node Wrangler add-on, what we'll have to do is create individual image textures and link them manually. Now you can see a few textures are not linked because this is the ambient occlusion, really a node that takes ambient occlusion data. But don't worry, when it comes to Unity, we can add it directly as well. You can see the texture is to this 3D object, we need some sort of an info so that Blender can figure out how it should be mapped or projected onto this 3D surface. So that data is provided by this UV map. So it will reference this UV map to add the texture onto this 3D surface. So I'll show you an example. So if I select the top part, and you can see we are getting a 2D representation, a flat 2D representation of this 3D mesh. And if I select everything by pressing A, and if I move them, you can see as I move it around this texture, it is affecting how it is displayed in the 3D viewport as well. So as I mentioned earlier, it is a 2D representation of this 3D image that is used to define how this texture should be added or projected onto this mesh. As you can see, this 2D representation is a little bit off. It is stretching and it is not looking like this shape over here. Since I'm working on the top part, I'm going to press the slash button to isolate it so that I can work clearly. There are two ways of unwrapping. Use the default smart UV unwrap that will automate UV map, but sometimes it's okay. But most of the times when you're modeling something that is detailed like this, or something that is small and compact, it is better to manually unwrap your objects. To manually unwrap, we have to tell Blender these textures need to be cut off at certain points. Now these cutoff points are known as seams, and we can add it at certain points so that Blender understands, okay, this is the part where I cut off this UV map and create a new one based on this seam. So let's add our seams into the model. Now to add our seams, it's simple. So it is better to add seams to places where the model is not visible to the viewer. So under part of the model or something that is inside, because when you add a seam, you'll be able to see a cut where that seam is added, and it will be visible in the texture as well as in the 3D model. So it is better to add that seam where the model is not fully visualized or fully seen by the user. So I'm just going to add a few cuts over here. I'm going to select these vertices. What I'm going to do is, after I selected the vertices, I'm going to switch over into edge mode and right click and mark as seam. And once you click that, you will be able to see edge becomes red. That is to signify this edge right now is a seam. So I'll just do that for this it up a bit. So we have basically unwrapped the top portion of the chest. Now we can switch over from the isolation mode and do the same for the bottom part as well. The object is not applied. So that is something you need to do if you're scaling your objects outside of edit mode. To do that, you can just press Ctrl A to open up this apply menu and apply the scale. So you can see it is now 111. Now if I select it and unwrap it, so this one right here, it is not getting any issues. Our texture we downloaded is a metallic one. It looks like it is a metal object, but when it comes to the chest that we are using as a reference, you can see the edges are more like gold plated. So what I did was take this texture, that is this base color texture, and I went into Photoshop, created a gold variant that I'll be linking down below in the description. So let me just add. So as you can see, I've added the editor version. So this is the texture. I've added it. Now it looks similar to our reference images. Regarding the diamonds, there are two ways you can create diamonds when it comes to Blender. One is by simply creating an icosphere. So you can just go into the add menu that is over in the left top corner, or shift A to access it using a shortcut, and go into the menu and click on icosphere, and you can see it creates a structure like this where you can just edit it to the shape of a diamond. But there is an add-on that helps you create diamonds as well, that is known as objects. It's a default Blender add-on. You can install it by going into preference and add-on. So make sure you enable this one. If you want to make additional object using curves, which is not covered in this topic or this tutorial, you can actually enable this one too. But for the sake of following this tutorial, just add the extra objects. After you enable that, just shift A to open the menu, and you can see you'll get much more options when you add the extra objects add-on. Just go into diamonds, and there are bold edges like we see in the reference image. Well, there are two options. One, you can manually sit and add these edges by beveling and selecting and assigning a new material to it, or you can use a modifier that is known as wireframe. Modifier menu under generate wireframe. When you first apply it, it will just show you a mesh or a skeletal version of the wireframe view, but we don't want that. We want the diamond as well as this edge to be applied. So what you can do is just tick this replace original, and you can see the mesh actually appears back in. We still don't have a material that is applied onto this edge. So to do that, you can just go into the material properties window, go to this plus icon and create a new material known as gold, and set the color to that gold, or you can just set a golden color. We go back into your wireframe modifier. At the bottom, you can see an option known as material offset. So the ability of the wireframe modifier, you can actually assign different materials just to the wireframe that is created using this modifier. Now, currently it is using the 0 material, so that is the first material that is applied. But if we add an offset, you can see the second material gets applied. We get the gold edges. Now the gold edges are a bit too much, so I'm just gonna reduce value so it looks much more realistic. Now what you can do is, since this is a diamond, it's going to be really reflective, and there are a bunch of properties inside this material that you can tweak to get that effect. One of the major properties is the metallic. So if we increase the metallic for the gold metallic, you can see you get that metal look. Now if we just decrease the roughness, you can make it reflective. The same for the gold edge as well, and that basically gives us the diamond we need for our treasure chest. It's as simple as that. Now the thing with using shaders or just materials is that when you go into Unity, you'll have to reapply them, but when it comes to that part, I'll explain it once again, so you don't need to worry about that. Now let's go back into our layout and move our chest and start arranging this diamonds inside of the chest. Okay, so we have basically filled the treasure chest with the diamonds. Now we just move back treasure chest. Now the thing is that since the pivot or the center point of the treasure chest is at the center of the mesh, if we try to rotate it in any other axes, so if I just select this one and rotate it, you can see it is rotating based on that center point. Now there is actually an option that allows us to change the center point of an object. Now to do that, we can use the 3D cursor. What I'm going to do is select this edge over here back and Shift S to open up this circle menu, and I'm going to select the last option, that is cursor to select. So basically I'm bringing the 3D cursor to this specific location. So you can see the 3D cursor has appeared there. Now what you can do is switch over into object mode, right click, set origin to 3D cursor. Before we do anything, what we need to do is apply the mirror modifier. To apply any modifier, you can just click on this drop down and click apply. Now if we edit it, you can see it is a single mesh. So make sure you finished all your edits before you apply the modifier. Now what you can do is right click, set your origin where the 3D cursor is. So if I do that, you can see the center point is here. So if I try to rotate this object by switching over to the rotate gizmo, you can see it is rotating based on that center point, and we can just move the lock to that position as well. So I'm just going to go over to side view so it's more helpful. I'm going to rotate it by pressing R on my keyboard. I'm going to move it and place it where it should be. Just going to move it down a little bit. Our treasure chest with a bunch of diamonds that we can add to our game. So that was the basics of texturing as well as UV mapping, as well as setting up your models for a game engine. That is how you can texture your model as well as UV unwrap when it comes to Blender. So hope you guys got a brief on how you can approach texturing as well as UV unwrapping with the help of this video. In the coming videos, we'll be switching over into our game engine, that is Unity for this example. We'll go over the basics of installing as well as the interface before we get started with the game development part. So if you like what you saw and want to see more, make sure you subscribe and click the bell notification to get notified whenever we post a new video. And if you like this video, give this video a thumbs up. And until next time, bye.